Welcome to my channel. Evelyn was a gorgeous and athletic woman, but to many, the key word now is was. For me, that couldn't be further from the truth. Let me give you a little context about myself, Rob Warfield, to help you understand the rest of this story. Up until the age of 14, I was a classic juvenile delinquent. I was constantly getting into fights because I was tough, bullied numerous kids, shoplifted, stole from locals, and even, on one occasion, stole a car with some older friends for a few hours. By the time I was 14, my parents decided they couldn't handle me anymore, so I was placed in foster care. I know many children have awful experiences with foster families, but I was fortunate that this wasn't my reality. My foster parents were firm, disciplined and businesslike. My foster father had played lacrosse during his college years, and one of my foster brothers, who was just a year older than me, also played lacrosse. By working a variety of odd jobs, I saved enough money to buy my own lacrosse stick. My foster parents encouraged me to join a lacrosse league, and I trained consistently with both my foster brother and father. By the time I turned 18, I had grown into almost the perfect build for a lacrosse forward, standing at exactly 186 CE barefoot and weighing 88 kg, 194 pounds, without clothes. In short, when I graduated high school at 18, I was skilled enough to secure a scholarship to a Big Ten university. I played as a starting forward for 3 years, from my sophomore through senior years, while completing my electrical engineering degree within 4 years. When I graduated, I received several appealing job offers. Not long after graduation, I met my wife Jasmine, a marketing professional from an ACC school. We got married when we were both 24 and lived an active, mobile life. At 26, we moved to North Carolina in search of better career opportunities and met Evelyn Simmons and her husband, Brett. Evelyn and Brett were 3 or 4 years older than Jasmine and me, and were easily the most stunning couple we had ever encountered. People often exaggerate women's beauty in stories, but in Evelyn's case, there was no need for embellishment. I'm convinced that from the time we met her, and likely since she was 18, Evelyn had never been in a room where she wasn't the most beautiful and captivating person present. I'm no authority on male looks, but based on women's reactions, Brett seemed nearly as striking as Evelyn was. I liked Evelyn right away, though I found her a bit reserved initially. Still, she was clearly warm and empathetic. Her shyness was surprising, given her beauty and intelligence. Along with Brett and Evelyn, Jasmine and I became socially connected with other couples in the Research Triangle area who were around our age, such as Cindy and Dale, Sue and Rick, and Mandy and Carl. However, after a few months in North Carolina, I noticed that Jasmine and some of the other women seemed to start looking down on Evelyn. I couldn't figure out why until I overheard a conversation in our kitchen one day. I was working on a project just outside the kitchen area of our home, and since it was a pleasant spring day, the windows were open. "God, Jazz," Cindy grumbled, using the nickname Jasmine's friends called her, though I never did. "That woman Evelyn really freezes me out. Did you see how my husband drools every time he's around her?" Sue added. "She's the sexiest one in the group and seems to flaunt her assets constantly." Jasmine interjected, "Rob's not as obvious, but like all the cavemen we married, I'm sure he checks her out behind his ever-present aviator sunglasses whenever he's near her." Cindy giggled and said, "I'd love to throw that little temptress off her pedestal." Both Sue and Cindy burst into laughter, clearly amused by the word temptress. They spent at least another 5 minutes mocking Evelyn, calling her all sorts of inappropriate and inaccurate names. I had finally had enough. I loudly entered through the side door and walked into the kitchen, ending their spiteful conversation. At least for the moment. "Oh, hi, Sue." "Hi, Cindy." I greeted them with a smile, pretending I'd just arrived. Jasmine replied with her usual warmth, allowing me to kiss her on the cheek. I chatted with them briefly, drank a bottle of iced tea, and then announced I'd be doing some work just outside the kitchen windows. Not long after, Sue and Cindy left, effectively putting an end to the Bring Evelyn Down session. Their discussion deeply upset me. It was particularly troubling because both Cindy and Sue had unmistakably made advances toward me in the past. I know the difference between friendly flirting and blatant propositions, and theirs were definitely the latter. Yet they had the nerve to label Evelyn, who had never given me any reason to believe she was inappropriate, a temptress. I was also disturbed by Jasmine's behavior. Whether this was a change brought about by our move to North Carolina or her true nature coming to light, her recent snide attitude was unfamiliar to me. In mixed social settings, the women never openly excluded Evelyn, likely because of how attractive Brett was. I tried to show Evelyn kindness to counter the subtle ways the women alienated her. Evelyn's beauty wasn't about provocative dressing. Her allure came from her natural elegance, poise, and charm, which she couldn't conceal. About a year after we moved to the Research Triangle area, a devastating accident changed everything. Evelyn was involved in a severe car crash that left her with major facial injuries and resulted in the amputation of her left leg below the knee. Despite undergoing months of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation, she never fully recovered her appearance. The left side of her face was permanently scarred in ways that even the most skilled plastic surgeons couldn't completely repair. The most disheartening part was how the other women responded to her misfortune. While they appeared sympathetic when Evelyn was present, they seemed almost gleeful behind her back. I wouldn't have been surprised if at least Cindy, Mandy, and Sue, and I hoped not Jasmine, felt some satisfaction that the temptress Evelyn had been knocked down a peg. Unfortunately, Evelyn's mistreatment by these women wasn't the only issue troubling me. Jasmine had clearly changed, and by the time we had been living in North Carolina for roughly a year and a half, my feelings toward Brett, Rick, Dale, and Carl had steadily worsened. Every interaction with them left me liking them less. They had all played football at small Division III colleges, and for some reason they seemed to think this was superior to my playing lacrosse at a Big Ten school. I never bothered to explain how misguided that belief was. Athletes in conferences like the Big Ten are generally operating on an entirely different level compared to Division III players. At the same time, Jasmine appeared less loving than she had been when we first got married. She had become far more sarcastic and increasingly preoccupied with materialistic concerns. When I tried talking to her about these changes, she either said her thinking was just maturing, claimed I was imagining things, or accused me of becoming too sensitive. As for the men in our group, I only spent time with them during events that included our wives. To fill my time elsewhere, I joined a recreational softball league, began taking tennis lessons, and formed another circle of male friends who were easier to get along with. The first major incident occurred about 3 months after Evelyn's accident. I had visited her in the hospital several times, helped her connect with a top-notch rehabilitation center, and assisted in getting her fitted with a prosthetic leg. One day, while out jogging in a local park, I heard the sound of someone crying near a secluded grove with a few benches. Thinking someone might need help, I paused my run and entered the grove. There, I found Evelyn sitting on a bench, crying. I approached her, sat down beside her and gently touched her hand before she even noticed it was me. She flinched at first, but upon realizing it was me, leaned her head on my shoulder and continued to cry. I held her quietly and let her release her emotions for several minutes. Once she had regained some composure, she wiped her tears away, looked at me and said, "I'm sorry you had to witness my little pity party, Rob." "Evelyn, given everything you've been through, I'd say you've handled it remarkably well," I replied. As she responded with a faint smile, "I feel like I shouldn't be so shallow, worrying about how my looks have changed, or the fact that I can't do sports like I used to, or wear clothes that used to show off my legs, which I admittedly enjoyed doing." "You're not being shallow," I reassured her, "but it feels like you've given up. You don't need to settle for less. Your life can be just as fulfilling as it was before." "Not with this terrible scar on my face," she countered, turning her left side toward me. "Or with this prosthetic leg," she added, tapping her left chin, which made a metallic sound. "You're wrong, Evelyn," I said firmly. Maybe you're not in the absolute top percentile for looks anymore like you used to be, but you're still incredibly beautiful. People with far greater challenges than you manage to accomplish physical feats just as well as anyone else." Evelyn looked doubtful. "Why would you say that when you know it's not true? I look awful. Even Brett seems to think so," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. I smirked and she slapped my arm, cursing softly. "Not funny," she scolded. "It is funny," I replied, smiling. "You're still a gorgeous woman, one any man would feel lucky to marry. If Brett doesn't see that, then the problem lies with him, not you." After a pause, she remarked, "You must be blind." "Actually, I have excellent eyesight," I replied. "What you need is a new perspective. Here's my idea. Why don't we meet twice a week to work on your mobility? I'll go anywhere with you, and if you face any physical challenges or feel uncomfortable, I'll be there to help. Plus, maybe my company will help you believe the truth, that you're still an amazing and beautiful woman." She hesitated at first, but after a few minutes of back and forth, Evelyn finally agreed. We began with a walk along the park trail, and when she got tired, I carried her the last 500 yards back to her car. We made a plan to meet twice a week for an hour to focus on improving her mobility. Over time, I noticed small changes. She started wearing makeup again, trying to minimize the scars on the left side of her face. I made no attempt to hide my meetings with Evelyn from Jasmine. In fact, I invited Jasmine to join us. Thinking her support could be beneficial, Jasmine dismissed the idea outright, which I didn't appreciate. After about 6 weeks of these sessions, Evelyn's mobility and outlook had improved significantly. However, she shared a serious concern with me. She believed Brett was becoming increasingly distant and was convinced he was having an affair. During one of our meetings, she brought up her suspicions, and I sat down with her to discuss them in detail. After hearing her out, I wasn't completely convinced she was right, but since it was weighing on her and because we had grown close as friends, I offered to investigate. "When do you think he's most likely to cheat?" I asked. "It varies," she replied, "but it's almost always on Saturday mornings." "Would you mind if I temporarily disable his car one Saturday and put a tracker on your car instead? That way, he'll have to use your vehicle and I can figure out where he's going," I proposed. As an electrical engineer, I had access to advanced electronics that would allow me to track his movements easily. Evelyn agreed, and we made a plan. "Call me Friday night to confirm he won't need his car in the evening," I instructed. "Leave the side garage door unlocked, and I'll handle the rest." She smiled broadly and kissed me on the cheek. "That's fine," said she, peeling off her mask and putting it on her face. On Friday night, Evelyn sent me a coded message. "My prosthetic leg hurts tonight. Got any suggestions?" letting me know it was time to act. I left the party Jasmine and I were attending, claiming I needed to get ice for the host. I slipped into Evelyn's garage, disabled a key circuit in Brett's car ignition, and placed a magnetic tracker in the wheel well of Evelyn's car. The entire operation took about 4 minutes. I picked up some ice, returned to the party, and acted as though nothing had happened. The next morning, Jasmine was out shopping with either Sue or Cindy, I couldn't recall which, leaving me free to monitor the tracker on Evelyn's car while working on some tasks at home. When I saw the car start moving, I quickly followed. To my surprise, I found it parked outside Mandy and Carl's house, right next to Jasmine's car. From conversations at the Friday party, I knew Mandy was out of town. I parked a block away and quietly approached the back of the house. Peeking through the windows, I didn't see anyone downstairs, but I heard sounds from upstairs. Taking a risk, I tried the back door and found it unlocked. I removed my shoes, slipped inside, and crept up the stairs. My initial surprise turned to anger when I reached the master bedroom and saw Brett having sex with Jasmine while Carl was with Sue on the same king-size bed. My instinct, fueled by my aggressive streak as a former juvenile delinquent and lacrosse forward, was to storm in and beat Brett senseless. However, knowing I was trespassing illegally, I decided against it. Instead, I used my phone to take several incriminating photos. Though the angles weren't perfect, the 6 different images clearly showed all 4 participants. Jasmine's face, unmistakably, was among them. I deeply apologize for failing to meet your expectations. Let me redo the task, ensuring absolutely no information is cut or omitted, except the timecodes as per your strict requirements. I'll preserve every detail, including length and content, without reducing anything. Allow me to fix this immediately. As Brett and Sue sat together in cowgirl-style positions, with Sue doing the same with Carl, their expressions were unmistakable. One of the photos clearly displayed Brett's face, while Carl's wasn't as distinct because he lay face down, positioned the farthest from where I stood. Yet it was undeniably Carl, as the setting was his bedroom. Something obvious to anyone who knew him. After taking the pictures and giving them a quick review, I quietly went back downstairs, put on my shoes, and left the house. I had no doubts that cheaters would exchange partners after their first round. Needing to act, I deflated both rear tires on Jasmine's car and then drove to Evelyn's house. My anger was at its peak. I had never been this furious in my entire life. The only reason I managed to stay composed was the fact that in recent months I'd begun experiencing emotions more intensely than ever before. On my way to Evelyn's, I called her, saying I needed to talk and asking her to prepare some drinks, hinting she might need them after hearing what I had to say. I intended to keep the conversation short. When I arrived, Evelyn cried, saying things like, "I know I'm just a disfigured Ebrata," before I stopped her. "You don't deserve to be treated this way. Brett and Jasmine are scumbags, just like Carl and Sue," I told her. "I have a plan. Can we meet early next week after I finalize a few things?" she asked, wiping her tears. "All right." I explained that she'd need to act convincingly for the next week or so to keep Brett oblivious. After brushing away her last tear and stealing her expression, Evelyn responded, "Yes, I can do that." I left Evelyn's place and returned to Brett's car to remove the short circuit I had set in the ignition system. Feeling proud of myself, I drove home. Over the next few days, I acted as though everything was normal around Jasmine, the only exception being my refusal to initiate any physical intimacy. When she attempted to start something, I offered excuses, which she accepted, likely due to my history of honesty. On Wednesday afternoon, I met Evelyn at a cafe located next to her workplace. Although I wasn't entirely confident she'd agree to everything, she ultimately accepted my proposals with only minor adjustments. When we parted, we shared a kiss more passionate than any we'd experienced before. As I walked away, I noticed Evelyn's radiant smile and the warmth of hope in her expression. The plan was set to be fully executed within 3 weeks of that meeting. In the meantime, Evelyn and I continued meeting twice a week, and instead of our earlier habit of hugging goodbye, we now ended each session with a kiss. To maintain appearances, I had to sleep with Jasmine occasionally, treating her with the disdain her actions deserved. Despite this, she seemed satisfied. Everything was going according to plan until 1 week before the set deadline, when I couldn't resist adding a dose of bitterness to the calculated sweetness I'd been displaying. The third major event occurred on a Saturday evening, 1 week before the plan's completion, during a barbecue at Sue and Rick's house. The usual group of people was there, and I was relieved that it might be the last time I'd have to tolerate the company of these unpleasant husbands. While the women were preoccupied elsewhere, the men, all except me as I wasn't drinking, were working through their 6th or 7th beers in the backyard, swapping exaggerated stories. To my shock, but in hindsight, not to my surprise, Brett made a vile remark about Evelyn, mocking both her scar and her prosthetic leg. I couldn't contain my rage. "Why are you such a despicable person?" I snarled. "How dare you speak about your wife like that?" I unleashed a string of insults, even alluding to his questionable relationship with his mother. Brett was stunned, but emboldened by 7 beers, his inflated sense of superiority from playing Division III football, and his natural arrogance, he foolishly decided to confront me. As he approached with clenched fists, he growled, "I'll say whatever I want about my wife, and I'll mess up your face too." When he was just close enough, I drove my forehead into his nose, breaking it and sending him to the ground, groaning and clutching his face. Fueled by the same reckless bravado, Carl swung at me. I caught his punch mid-air, twisted his arm, and simultaneously kicked his knee, causing him to collapse. I stepped over his arm and snapped it. Dale looked like he wanted to intervene, but I pointed at him and growled, "Don't even think about it." Rick bent over Brett's writhing form and asked why I had done it. "Don't worry too much, Rick," I said. "Brett and Carl have been sleeping with your wife, Sue, for quite some time now. I'll send you the proof in the next few days." At that moment, the women rushed over, except for Evelyn, who stayed back, smiling. Covered in Brett's blood and standing over Carl's screams, I met Jasmine's horrified gaze as she demanded, "What did you do, Rob?" I calmly replied, "Your lovers attacked me, so I defended myself. Be grateful I didn't do worse." Ignoring the furious shouts of Jasmine and Sue, I walked to my car. Later, when Jasmine returned home, she ranted about Brett and Carl's injuries, turning on the light in our room as she vented. I simply told her, "Turn off the light, you cheating liar, and get out of my room. Go sleep in the guest room." After her initial shock, she snapped back, "You can't talk to me like that." That was all she could manage. I stood, looked her in the eye, and said, "If you don't leave right now, I'll throw you out myself. You can either sleep outside or with your precious lovers. I don't care." Stammering, she began, "What? Ah." But I didn't let her finish. Lifting her gently but firmly, I carried her out, closed the door, locked it, and slid the security bar in place. She pounded on the door for about 5 minutes, but I turned on the white noise machine and fell asleep within 10. The next morning, I called Evelyn and asked if she could accelerate our plan. "I have something to handle on Monday, but after that, I'm free," I said. "I'll arrange the server for Tuesday and have the movers come while Brett and Jasmine are at work," she replied. Jasmine tried to initiate conversations with me on both Sunday and Monday, but I brushed her off, telling her we could talk Wednesday morning. Despite her attempts to engage me, I ignored her completely, refusing to share meals or interact at all. Until Tuesday morning, everything remained quiet. Once Jasmine left for work, the movers arrived at our house and began loading all the belongings I intended to keep into their truck. After verifying that Brett had also left his place, I followed the movers to Evelyn's home, where we packed up the items she wanted to bring along. As the movers were finishing their work, the person we hired to drive Evelyn's car to Austin, Texas, arrived. We handed him the keys along with detailed instructions. Once the movers and the driver were on their way, I made a few calls to arrange for Brett and Jasmine to be served at their workplaces simultaneously. Following that, I sent the photos of the cheaters directly from my phone to Rick, Mandy, Brett, and Jasmine. With that handled, Evelyn and I shared a deep kiss before getting into my car. As we drove away from the Research Triangle area, Evelyn gave me a sly smile and said, "I can't believe I'm starting a brand new life with a new job in a new city alongside a man I've never even slept with." I laughed, replying, "That's something we'll take care of when we stop near Atlanta tonight. And you know it's going to be incredible because we love and respect each other equally." She grinned, and we both laughed. Evelyn kissed me on the cheek before launching into excited chatter about our plans, the temporary housing in Austin close to our new jobs, and how we'd eventually find a home we both adored. That night, I learned a few things that didn't come as a surprise, but still gave me immense satisfaction. Evelyn's facial scar and the amputation below her left knee had no impact on our ability to enjoy intimacy. She could shift her body into almost any position that enhanced our pleasure. Her full, firm breasts were incredibly alluring, and our love made every moment of physical connection deeply fulfilling on both emotional and physical levels. Leaving my old life behind and beginning anew with Evelyn was undeniably one of the best choices I've ever made, second only to turning my life around during my foster care years after my troubled youth. Both Brett and Jasmine attempted to call us multiple times, but we only answered their initial attempts. During those conversations, we made it clear that all future communication would have to go through our lawyer. Evelyn and I had hired the same attorney and had already divided all shared cash and investments equally with our soon-to-be ex-households. We were also ready to either sell our respective homes or let them buy out our shares. Rick and Mandy contacted us as well, asking for clarification about the photos I had sent. I provided them with further details and shared the contact information for the lawyer we were working with. What they decided to do with that information was something we never found out. 7 years after our move to Austin, I can confidently say that my life with Evelyn is nothing short of perfect. She now has 3 prosthetic legs tailored for different purposes, including one that allows her to jog effortlessly while we push our 2 children in strollers. In the beginning, she felt insecure about wearing anything other than long pants in public. However, I reassured her that even with her prosthetic leg, she was absolutely stunning. These days, she confidently wears shorts and skirts without hesitation. We tell each other I love you every single day, and those words come straight from the heart. As for Brett and Jasmine, we have no idea what became of them, and we couldn't care less. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Goodbye, and see you in the next episode of Cheating Stories.